Thanks. So thank you everyone for coming, and this is a BFG session, and today's session is a Meet the Funder with Francis Shaw from the Fore to talk about best ways to apply for funding with the Fore. So Francis, shall I just let you go ahead?
Yeah, lovely, Alex. Thanks so much. Yeah, so as Alex said, my name's Francis. I'm head of programs and impact here at the Fore, and over the next sort of 30 to 40 minutes or so, I'll tell you a little bit about who we are at the Fore, what we offer and why we offer it. I'll talk you through what we fund with some examples in practice to help contextualize that. I'll go through the application process itself, and if you do decide to submit an application, what you need to submit as part of that. And I'll sort of end with an outline of what a good application looks like with some sort of tips and things to avoid. So, who are we at the Fore? So we are an industry-leading funder of innovative small charities. We focus specifically on organisations who have an annual turnover of less than £500,000 a year. We don't just offer grant funding, that's one of the strands that we offer. So if an organisation successfully receives funding from us, they will also have access to our pro bono member network, where we have around 2,000 plus volunteers from a variety of sectors, bringing a variety of experience to be able to support and help you on your journey. We also offer workshops and training, and these are delivered by industry experts. I'll tell you a little bit more on those after. And we also have our peer-to-peer networking, including our WhatsApp group, and also our peer chat series of sessions where basically we take feedback from our funded charities on the issues they're facing, and we try to get basically the collection of our funded charities into the same virtual room together to sort of work through the issues and try and sort of learn from each other together to overcome those problems. And this is just a couple of examples of some of the charities and social enterprises that we funded over the years. And I think at the minute we have awarded 555 grants, which has been worth just over 9 million. And we're about to, in the next couple of weeks, award a few more through our spring funding round. So our mission is to turbocharge exceptional small charities to transform lives and societies. Our ambition is to fund and support 1,000 charities and social enterprises over the next 5 years. Sort of funding themes, basically, in a nutshell, we're cause agnostic. We don't sort of, the cause of your charity or social enterprise doesn't factor into our decision making. We're very much about the funding ask itself and the extent to which it's transformational. And I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by transformational. But because we're cause agnostic, basically, we will accept applications from charities and social enterprises working across the whole spectrum of themes. And we've sort of categorized them into youth opportunity, sustainability, mental health and well-being, and social equity and inclusion. And I think you'd be hard pushed to find a charity or social enterprise that can't fit into at least one of those broad categories. So why do we focus on smaller charities and social enterprises with an income of under 500,000? So we recognize that the country is facing immense challenges from ill health, inequality, injustice. We're starting to see the impacts of climate change. We recognize that, very often top-down interventions just aren't cutting it. And actually, even where they do cut it, we recognize that top-down interventions in isolation are not sufficient enough to solve the problems that we're facing. And we recognize that there are thousands of innovative local charities across the length and breadth of the UK that have really amazing solutions to the problems that we're experiencing. And they're already showing the proof of concept and with their beneficiaries they're working with, sort of transforming lives. overcoming the problems that I've just mentioned. However, all too often these small charities aren't given the sort of platform or the tools that they need to be able to take their innovative solutions and shine a spotlight on them and bring them out onto the mainstream. So essentially, those barriers are stopping that innovation from sort of reaching wider than it possibly could. And that could be, for example, the potential is there to give organizations a bit of funding, a bit of skills support, and a bit of hand holding to help them bring their innovative solutions to the sort of national level, perhaps, but not just that, but also to sort of double down and improve the depth of beneficiary experience that they can offer, and also just providing examples for other charities and social enterprises to follow as well. So basically, we think that small charities and social enterprises are a key to solving the problems that we're facing as a nation and country at the minute. And really, it's quite interesting. The data, again, sort of helps contextualize why we focus on smaller charities. There are over 169,000 charities in the UK, 92% of which are classed as small, with the income of under £500,000 a year. However, despite them representing 92%, in 2022, these charities received less than 8.5% of the total sector income. And for micro charities, who we define as having an income of less than 100,000, this has gone down by 35% since 2007. And that's kind of represented here in the little bar chart. So it just, again, just really demonstrates how often, despite the fact that these small organizations are doing incredible work and are bringing really good solutions forward, they're not being given the funding that they need to really be able to unlock their potential. And essentially that's where the Fore comes in. So with our support, we hope that they'll be able to fully unlock their potential and fully realize their aspirations. And just a little bit about our impact. We know that what we do works. And if you see the little graph here, you can see the Fore's charities income in blue and other charities income in our control group below that. And you can basically see that in the years after a grant fund from the Fore, their income increases considerably, and much more than the control group. So it does demonstrate that essentially supporting these small charities and seeking out the most innovative and strongest charities with the most transformational funding asks and the strongest leadership, and giving them the support they need, can absolutely unlock their potential. And this here in this example, we're showing that as being manifested in the change in income growth over the years after receiving a grant from the Fore. And here's just a couple of stats from our 2022-23 impact report. We have a score of 79% against targets that we set at the grant giving stage, where basically it could be things around increasing beneficiaries, increasing financial resilience, diversifying income streams, that type of thing. And just here's some other data along with that. So the charities we funded in our impact report, most recent impact report, we've seen that there was a 43% increase in beneficiaries reached, 195 additional locations operated in, 23% in programs and projects offered, 27% increase in volunteer time, 24% in staff time, and a 44% growth in total income. So before we go on to chat about what it is we're looking for, I thought it was worth just again highlighting what the eligibility criteria is. And I've already alluded to the fact that we focus on organizations with an annual income of under 500k. So who's eligible? UK registered charities, community interest companies, charitable incorporated organizations, and community benefit societies. So charities can apply if they're faith-based, but the ask that they are coming to us for can't be exclusionary to those with a different religious faith. So absolutely faith-based charities can apply. And if you want to find out a bit more info and to check your eligibility, we have an eligibility checker on our website. So I'd recommend going there and having a look just if you still feel like you're not sure about whether or not you would be eligible to apply. So what we offer, I touched on this at the start, but we offer unrestricted grant funding. So we offer unrestricted grants of up to £30,000 spread over 1 to 3 years, depending on what works for you. Funding can be used for whatever you need for your organisation to grow, strengthen, and become more efficient or resilient. That could be, for example, if the organisation up until now has been volunteer-led, bringing in its first paid staff member to bolster capacity, or it could be, for example, where there are already staff in place and there are capacity issues, perhaps, for example, bringing in a project delivery officer or an administration officer to free up time of the senior leadership team to focus on more strategic matters for the organisation. Or it could be, for example, a CRM system to sort of introduce efficiencies into your systems, basically. So we again, just as long as the funding ask is transformational for the organisation, it would be eligible. Applicants set their own targets for the grant term with the support of our strategic applicant consultants. And I'll talk you through a little bit about who our strategic applicant consultants are in a little bit more detail after. And there's no long application or monitoring forms. Again, I'll talk you through the process for the application, but we don't ask tons and tons of questions. We completely recognise that it can be a massive time drain applying to trusts and foundations, and the success rate unfortunately isn't as high as what we would all like it to be. So we've taken that into account to make the process as proportionate as we possibly can while still making sure we're completing our due diligence. And we guarantee feedback for every applicant as well, because we think that's really important, especially if applicants want to reapply to us or want to apply to other trusts and foundations in the future. So as I said, it's not just about funding. We also offer skills support and networking. So we have a curated workshop program with workshops that are led by industry experts around matters such as fundraising, strategy, and marketing. These are open to all organisations, but we do give subsidised tickets to our funded charities. And it's just worth stressing that we don't make any money from the workshop programme. The cost that we charge to attendees is directly covering the costs that we give for the industry leading experts that deliver them. We also offer, as I've said, access to our pro bono support through our network of skilled pro bono network members. They can support our funded charities on a range of matters. I'm thinking most recently we had an example of a charity that was going through a rebrand and needed support with their key messaging and their comms and how they describe themselves. And we were able to link them up with a marketing expert through our pro bono network to support them with the website copy and the website development itself. We also offer impact measurement support. We recognise that a lot of small charities might not be as far advanced as they would like to be on the impact measurement front. So through these impact measurement courses, we hope to be able to support organisations to put robust frameworks in place to better demonstrate their impact, to both improve services in the spirit of continuous improvement, but also to better demonstrate impact when applying to other trusts and foundations for funding in the future. And as I mentioned, we also have our online and in-person networking opportunities in our peer-to-peer network. So when we say we fund transformational impact, what does that mean? And basically, it can mean very different things depending on your organisation. But I thought basically I would go through the 4 pillars and sort of try to highlight examples under each so that you can hopefully get a feel for what we mean by transformational impact and therefore a transformational grant funding ask. And then I'll give you a couple of examples in practice just so how you can see that works in context. So basically, we fund anything that supports a step change in growth. So this refers to strengthening your capability to scale. It could be providing the resource and infrastructure needed and freeing up capacity, for example, by employing staff to overcome immediate capacity issues, which could in turn then free up capacity of leaders to focus on long-term strategy. We fund funding asks that help you foster organizational sustainability. So this could refer to initiatives that place the organization in a strong position to face expected and unexpected challenges. It could be adapting operations, structure, or service provision for long-term success. For example, it could be diversifying the offer or creating a training arm to generate unrestricted income to bolster financial sustainability and resilience. We'll fund a funding ask that focuses on the development of your organization structure. So for example, if you want to move from a largely volunteer-led to an employee-led run organization, or you want to move away from utilizing a pool of freelancers to bring in a permanent or long-term member of staff, that again would be acceptable. So that could be employing your first paid member of staff to provide more capacity. And also we fund funding asks that focus on improving organizational efficiency. So it could be that your organization has outgrown its current systems, or you want to streamline your data management and your technical equipment. And the example I gave earlier was bringing in a CRM system. And I think when I sort of talk about each of those four, you'll see there's a lot of crossover and overlap between them, but I think that's just a nice way of giving just a flavour of what we mean by transformational impact. And I think it's really worth stressing that when we talk about transformational impact, we want to see a funding ask that will lead to a sort of sustained long-term change for your organisation, and that basically once the grant funding from the Fore has ended, you don't revert back to the way you were working and operating before you received the grant from the Fore. So a couple of examples in practice. So I'll talk you through Sal's shoes as a nice example, and I'll talk you through what the problem was that they were facing, essentially what the funding ask was for, and what's happened since then. So Sal's Shoes provides pre-loved shoes to children in need in the UK and worldwide. Set up in 2013, by 2021, they distributed 2.5 million pairs of shoes, which is incredible. However, Sal's were starting to struggle to meet the ever-increasing demand for the shoes that they were offering to children around the world. And essentially that was because it was a volunteer-led organisation, and they knew that they needed greater capacity to be able to grow and develop and meet the demand and become a more sustainable and stronger organisation. So essentially the grant funding from the Fore was to allow the founder, who was operating in a volunteer capacity, to leave her existing job and devote herself full-time as CEO to the organisation. And this provided the capacity for Sal to diversify its income base, so income from funding from trusts and foundations, but also untapped corporate donations and that pipeline of funding as well. It also provided much needed time for business planning and improved financial resilience. And we connected her through our pro bono network with the former vice chair of Deloitte, who provided financial strategic support to CJ, and he now chairs the charity itself. And I feel like you can see some great stats there, and while you can see that our funding has very much helped the organisation experience a step change in growth in terms of the number of beneficiaries supported, it's not just about the beneficiary. The story here is about organisation sustainability and resilience. It's about diversifying income streams, bolstering existing income streams, and business planning to basically lay the foundations to allow the organisation to scale up and reach more beneficiaries. And then another example I want to give you is Stable Lives. And you can find a full case study for Stable Lives if you're interested in our latest monitoring and evaluation report, which is on the Fore's website. But I'll just take you through sort of some of the high level points. So Stable Life supports adults and young people experiencing mental health challenges to rest and recover through nature and equine therapy. Again, demand for their services was skyrocketing. There was a massive need to increase capacity. However, the founder, Carrie, was so focused on day-to-day delivery, she hadn't got time to sort of look up and focus on the wider strategy and coming up with a plan to be able to work out a way to meet this ever-growing demand. So with the help of the Fore's funding, they were able to recruit a project support officer who then freed up Carrie's time, which allowed her to focus on strategy and growth. So this included cultivating partnerships and also establishing a framework, an evaluation framework to better demonstrate impact and in turn secure more grants and commissioned work. So again, it's about organizational resilience and strengthening the sort of capacity of the organization to think about the long term and building up financial sustainability and resilience. And this grant is still a live one, but in the space of just a year, they've exceeded their income projections by 75%. They've almost doubled their programs and they've increased their beneficiaries by 67%. And they have a lot of ambitious plans over the next couple of years, and one of which is to hopefully go nationwide. So hopefully that just gives you an idea of some of the transformational funding asks we've received in the past. But by all means, go on, have a look on our website. There's tons of case studies in there, and you'll see the types of things that organizations have asked for in the past and how that's helped them. So I'll now just run you through the application process itself. So essentially the way it works is we open for registration for a week, and you can register your interest to apply. It only takes a couple of minutes. And unfortunately, very often the case is we have more registrations than we have places available on the funding round itself. So that basically means that we can't offer everyone who registers the opportunity to submit an application form. So we basically select organizations from the pool, from the registration pool at random, and then invite them to apply. And then basically, once you're invited to apply, you'll have a few weeks to draft your application itself. And then it will then go to a designated strategic applicant consultant who's there to assess your funding ask and work with you potentially to develop it, and also to just help you shape the funding ask if they want to take it. They feel like at this stage they could take it through some of the other stages you can see here. So stage one is a sort of quick fire review of all the applications received, and 30% or more of those will be taken through to stage two. If you aren't successful at stage one, you'll get some written feedback with the view to being able to take that on board if you do decide to apply again in the future. And we've had a lot of organizations in the past that weren't successful the first time around, but took on board the feedback they received at that stage and were then subsequently successful. And then if you get through past the first stage, you'll go to stage two, which is ideas testing, where you'll have an hour-long chat with one of our strategic applicant consultants just to understand you and your organization a little bit better, and also to understand your funding ask better, and potentially sort of to discuss the targets that you've included in the application itself. And basically off the back of that, the strategic applicant consultant will come away, consider your application, the conversation they had with you in the round with the other applicants and the other conversations that were had. And then they will decide on whether or not to progress you to stage three, which is the funding panel. And applications that get to funding panel, usually 60% of those that go to that stage will receive the grant funding. And then stage four is the funding itself. And basically, if you're unsuccessful in the process, the further along you get, the more detailed the feedback is. And obviously, we'd love to give everybody really detailed feedback, but we are a very small team, but we do at the very least give written feedback at stage one. So no matter what stage in the process you get to, you will get some feedback, which hopefully you would find useful. So the application document itself, we don't have a standard form with lots of questions. We basically just asked you to submit three pages that sets out these 6 things. We don't dictate how much words should be used for each of these. It's very much dependent on you and your organization, because we want you to tell the story yourself in a way that works for you. But basically, it should include 6 simple sections. So tell us about your organization, who leads your organization, how much funding would you like, and over how many years. Tell us how the funding will be transformational for your organization. Set out a few simple targets and include a financial table. And I'll talk you through each of these in a bit more detail now. And also, we ask that you upload your latest set of audited accounts. Don't worry if you don't have audited accounts, that's absolutely fine. But just please then, in that case, upload your latest set of management accounts, just so our strategic applicant consultants can get a feel for where you are financially. So just breaking those 6 things down in slightly more detail. Tell us about your organization. So basically, give us an overview of the work you do, what issues your organization addressing, what work is it you do? Do you deliver programs? Is it more sort of advocacy, lobbying? What is the relationship with beneficiaries? Why is your work important? And how is it having an impact? And what I would say is, don't worry if you don't have ratings of impact stats that you can sort of pull off and put in the application form. We completely understand that a lot of small charities, as I said earlier, won't be there with impact evaluation and monitoring. So that's not a deal breaker. Obviously, it's great if you have that and include it, but it's not the end of the word if you don't. And then some information on who leads your organization. So what skills and experience does your senior management, directors and trustees have? What are the relationships with each other? And why are you the right people to do this? And I think this section is quite important, because one of the things we look for in terms of whether to award grant funding to an organization, it's yes, the transformational impact, but also it has to be the strength of leadership as well, because we just can't award grant funding for a really transformational ask where we feel like the strength of leadership isn't there. So that's a nice opportunity for you to demonstrate that. And then just tell us how much funding you would like and for how many years, up to 3. So it could be, we're requesting 29,000 over 2 years to install a CRM system. And as part, then go on to tell us how our funding will enable you to grow, strengthen, become more efficient or resilient, and that's the transformational impact. So how much of a marked step change you think you'll see in your organization after you've accessed the support? How will the funds help your organization achieve these changes? How will the changes be sustained beyond the grant period? And describe your vision for how different your organization will be once you've spent the grant. And just linked to the CRM example, in that example, you might want to you would probably see things like it would be transformational because the efficiencies introduced might save 2 days per week of the team's time collectively, which can then be used to focus on strategy. It can be used to focus on perhaps developing a commercial trading arm, that type of thing. So again, just a nice example of how it's sort of transformational in the short term, and in the long term, that then translates into putting the organization in a more sustainable position. Set a few simple targets for the grant period. It should reflect the changes you will see in your organization if you receive the funding, and basically help you demonstrate that the grant will help your organization achieve its goals. So it might be that you're a youth organization working with girls at risk of involvement in gangs and violence, and the founder needs more time to think about strategy and fundraising to build the organization. So if that's your funding ask, so sort of what would the targets look like? Well, okay, recruit a new staff member and hand over the delivery of activities to them to free up the founder's time. Create an initial fundraising plan and write 5 applications with the newly released capacity for the funder. Bring on 2 new independent trustees, one with business expertise, one with a legal background. And again, the founder will be able to do that and focus on sort of skills gap analysis for the trustees with the newfound capacity, and create a strategy and a full fundraising plan. And then the financial table, we have a template on our website, so you can just copy and paste that. But basically, this is a really nice way for including 3 years of historic data to let us see sort of what's gone before, and sort of perhaps, you know, the impact that COVID's had on the organization, the challenges the organizations face. And the fourth, just as important, are the forecasted 3 years, which basically allows us to get a sense of what the transformational impact of the funding ask would look like in terms of the finances and the financial stability of the organization. So it could be, for example, if the funding ask, an outcome of the funding ask was to enable you to diversify income streams or to maybe move away from a more grant-funded model, focusing on trust and foundations, to a sort of more unrestricted income model from other sources, then we would maybe want to see unrestricted income going up and restricted income going down. And again, that's just like a nice way to demonstrate the transformational impact in financial terms. And we ask you include your current level of unrestricted and restricted reserves and anything else that you would like to explain about your finances. So if you're presenting a big deficit in one of the years, and that's down to sort of the lumps and bumps of sort of receiving grants from trusts and foundations, maybe receiving it 1 year and spending it the next year, you can basically explain that away. So it's just a nice opportunity for you to sort of explain what's going on behind the sort of high level figures if you think you need to, particularly around when there's a sort of deficit, to help us understand what's been going on. And then just top tips. I think a good application should be no longer than 3 pages, and this includes the financial table. And I'd really stress that because unfortunately, if you submit an application that's longer than 3 pages, we're just not able to consider it out of fairness for the other organizations, because obviously we're trying to sort of compare like for like. So that's just a really easy win, keeping it at those 3 pages. And just also include the information we're looking for across the 6 areas we've just looked at, because again, if you're missing one of those sections, we won't be able to progress the application any further. And again, really important, focus on the content. It doesn't need to look beautiful. It doesn't need to be sort of done in Canva or some fancy design app. We really don't care about that. We're just focus on the content. It can just be literally 3 pages in a plain Word document. That doesn't matter. We don't want you to spend your time sort of trying to make things look really professional, because we don't judge on that basis. And also, don't invent the wheel. You can cut and paste bits from other funding applications that you've done in the past were relevant. Obviously, things that would be bespoke to the Fore would be the sort of funding ask and the extent to which it's transformational, and also the specific targets connected to that funding ask. Say avoid business as usual requests. We don't fund projects. So for example, I would suggest that if you're thinking of applying, it can't be for a funding ask that is to deliver a very specific program, and then when the funding from the Fore ends, that program cease to operate unless you find funding from another trust or foundation, because we're focusing on sustainability in the long term. And just make sure to explain why your funding ask is transformational. It can't just be about beneficiaries. And I think the Sal Shoes example was a really nice one, because while in that one, you can clearly see that the number of beneficiaries supported went through the roof, but that was basically an outcome of the transformation in the organization itself, which was sort of developing and bolstering income diversification through trusts and foundations, and tapping into corporate donors, and also developing a financial strategy as well. Have clear targets that are ambitious, but just also be realistic at the same time, because if you come up with quite unrealistic targets for income growth or whatever, it might raise questions with the strategic applicant consultant, and you might not get as far along in the process as you would hope. And the other thing is, just if you've applied before and you've got feedback before, please just take on that feedback, and just very briefly in the application itself, just set out how you've taken on board the feedback, because that then just makes it really easy for the strategic applicant consultant to sort of see that you've done that and to understand what you've changed, which will sort of increase the likelihood of success in the process. And just lastly, before we move on to the questions, So we run 3 rounds throughout the year. We have our spring round, our summer round, and within the summer round, there's some regional rounds, and we also have an autumn round as well. We're just about to open registration for our summer round, and that will open next Thursday and close the following Thursday. And you can see that link there at midday next Thursday. If you click on that link, you'll see another link to basically complete the registration form. It only takes a couple of minutes to complete. And then on Friday, the 5th of April, registered applicants will receive an email to confirm whether they have a place on the funding round, and details of how to submit your application will be included. And as I said, if we receive more registrations than we have places available, places will be allocated at random. And if you do get the opportunity then to submit an application, you'll need to get your application in by 5 o'clock on the 29th of April, and you'll have a decision from us by the end of July. So yeah, so that's it from me. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Francis. That was brilliant. And I also took in quite a lot in terms of how much you're looking to save time for smaller charities, because I think this is so crucial a lot of the time, and some of the funding applications can take so long to complete. We've got a few questions in the chat, and if anyone would like to ask a question themselves as well, they're welcome to put up their hands. I can start with a couple in the chat though. So I've got one from, there's quite a few coming through. So Afrikindness, for new organisations registered as CIO in 2023 with no set of audited accounts, can we still put in an application?
Yeah, absolutely fine. And that's quite common, because obviously we also accept applications from organisations that have an income of less than 100,000. So yes, absolutely go for it. Great.
And then we have another from Wiggs at Global Goals Centre. Can charities access your workshops pro bono support outside of the grant process, or are they tied together, i.e. it's only successfully funded charities who receive access to the rest of the amazing support you offer?
Yeah, so in terms of the workshops, basically anyone on our charities mailing list can access the workshop. So but by all means, go onto our website and get yourself on the charity mailing list if you think some of the workshops might be of interest to you. In terms of the pro bono support, that is usually only open to the charities that we award grant funding to. In some cases, we might also provide it to organisations that got quite far along in the process, but that's kind of few and far between. So I'd say workshops open to absolutely everyone, and the pro bono support is open to usually just our funded charities themselves.
Okay, great. We've got a couple more, but we've got a hand up from Eliz from the Bristol Cables. So Eliz, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Francis. That was really interesting. And I really appreciated what you said about impact stats, because it is really hard, obviously, for smaller charities a lot of the time. Some of our impact is really difficult to record. And so I'm wondering if, and I'm also pleased that you have 3 pages, because I do find that sometimes we need a bit of time to explain what it is that we're achieving. And I suppose what I'm wondering is it the future impact that we're intending to have that you would sort of want us to highlight? Or is it the concrete impact that we kind of know we have had? And is there a kind of perfect balance of, you know, if our impact isn't always about we've, you know, given this many people this many things, is there a way to frame our impact that kind of the organization prefers?
Yeah, I guess it's probably focused largely on the impact that you've had up until now, and where, as we said, you know, where you can't demonstrate that's fine. But in that case, you might just want to weave in very briefly, because obviously you've only got the 3 pages, a testimonial or 2 from some of your beneficiaries. That can be a nice way to demonstrate that, because we know, you know, it's not just a numbers game as well. It's a sort of more deeper level of support. And then sort of later on in the document itself, you can talk about the impact of the grant funding on beneficiary numbers, perhaps, or other aspects of the organization. So yeah, so I think if you don't have those, stats that you can easily reel off, then definitely a testimonial or two. But obviously, just conscious that that means words, and don't eat up too much words doing that, because we won't discriminate against you not having that. And I guess one thing I would say on that is sometimes in the past, applicants haven't been taken forward on the grounds of impact because we felt that they were just too early on in the stage and sort of their thinking around impact. But it also kind of very much depends on the strength of the cohort itself. But certainly, the fact that we offer impact support to our charities that receive funding shows that it's not an absolute deal breaker.
Great, thank you. So we've got a couple more questions in the chat. And like I said, if anyone wants to ask a question, please just put up your hand or interrupt me, I don't mind. One question from Molly. I'm not sure which charity she's from. Are there any charities that are too small turnover-wise?
No, not at all.
Great. And then another one here. Do you fund CIC Ltd by shares as well as Ltd by guarantee?
I feel like I don't want to give an answer to that in case I get it wrong, but what I would say is maybe whoever has asked that question, if you email info@thefore.org and ask it, basically someone in the team will be able to have a look and give you the proper answer. I just don't want to give you an incorrect answer and then you sort of spend time registering or whatever. So if you get in touch through the email, we'll follow up.
Great. So I've got one from Tessa. There were four areas you were looking for charities to achieve to be considered including growth. Is growth in beneficiary numbers an essential target for a successful application?
No, not at all. That's just one of the things that we look at. It's often one of the more common things we see, which isn't surprising, but we're also kind of looking at the sort of organizational sustainability itself. And it might be that, your goal isn't to increase massively the number of beneficiaries, and you might sort of have a very small beneficiary pool you provide a high level, in-depth level of support to, but actually you've decided, God, chasing trust and foundation funding isn't sustainable in the long term. We need like a better financial strategy. So that could be the transformation.
Great. Question from Deanna. Can you explain what kinds of things charities think are transformational and which the Fore doesn't? This seems to be an area of confusion for many applicants posting. Deanna, I don't know if you want to unmute and kind of explain a little bit more.
Sure. Hi, I'm Deanna Wolf. I do trust fundraising as a consultant. And in some of the social media posts, after the window's closed, or after things have come through, or just in advance, the idea of transformational is really, really confusing to people. And I think you've given us some good examples here, but it's a kind of thing of, actually, do you know what? It seems really simple, but a CRM is actually going to be transformational. Is it because people aren't explaining it properly? Is it because it's not transformational enough? And I think that's where there's a lot of confusion and a lot of frustration coming up to it. I know that there's some people who post, I'm never going to apply to them again because I can't be, I don't even know what they're looking for. So I think that's an area that's becoming really problematic. I think when people are looking, when experienced trust fundraisers are looking like, who can I apply to? This seems perfect, but I don't even know how to explain, like they don't even understand, or they're not clear on what you guys think is transformational.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks, Diana. And I guess there's the really straightforward category of where just very clearly the funding ask isn't transformational. So I know that's not the category you're talking about. And I think it's kind of a mix of not being transformational enough, perhaps, maybe not explaining it in enough detail, but also the fact that it's a really competitive process and we only have so many grants to award. So basically, there could be other organizations that have just sort of pipped the organization to the post in terms of what we determine to be more transformational or less transformational than the other. And I think in terms of explaining it properly, or not explaining it properly, as you said, I think the one thing I'd say is, for example, if the organization is applying for a funding ask that is talking about perhaps, I don't know, providing the time to develop a commercial training offer or something like that, for talk's sake, and in the financial table we see the figures going up quite impressively, I think sometimes when we're sort of looking at a lot of applications, and there's often similar funding requests as well, sometimes where the applicant may fall down is they don't really explain how they get to that figure because they don't talk about the pipeline. So for example, have you been speaking to people in the locality or otherwise that would suggest that actually there is the demand for this training offer to begin with? So I think that's maybe one of the examples, and just providing as much information as possible to basically give the link from the funding ask to the final outcome. Sorry, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's.
Can I just may I ask another a clarification on what you
Yeah,
said?
sure.
So would it be the kind of thing of, I'm using a CRM just because it's easy. Without the CRM, we're not going to be able to fulfill demand. So it's kind of a night and day transformation that if we don't have this and we can't figure out a way to get it other than applying to the Fore, at this point, without having that, we're not going to be able to deliver to anything more than what we are. But the demand out there is increasing and increasing and increasing. There's more demand, but we can't fulfill it because we just don't have the capability or the capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would maybe go a bit further on that front, and basically so that it's not just focused on beneficiaries, you're also basically then talking about, okay, well, with the CRM system, basically we're able to pull off data much more easily than what we were before. So because of that, we think our success rate at applying to trusts and foundations will increase. So this will lead to 10K on unrestricted income extra each year. So it's kind of just sort of linking the various strands together where possible.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. I have to say, as I'm with the Trust Fundraising Hub, and there's a lot of chat always in there of when things come on, people don't understand what transformational is, and that becomes a problematic question.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
Yeah, and what I would say, and that's why I wanted to include those examples, because I completely get that. And I think kind of in simple terms, and I know this is a huge oversimplification, but it's what leads to a step change for you and your organization, whether it be scaling, whether it be your financial model, and basically how does this lead to a change for your organization, not just for the grant period, but also for the long term? So basically changing the trajectory of what's been happening in your organization.
Great, thank you. I've got Caroline has their hand up. I'll just, there's a couple that have come through the chat as well. I'll just go over one in the chat and then go to Caroline. Julia and Tim Cole have asked, do you fund exceptional projects beyond our business as usual, like a longitudinal studies, so that we can strengthen ourselves but can't easily get funding for? Most generally, what is in scope and what is out of scope?
Yeah, absolutely. Provided that you sort of set out the case for how that's transformational, we don't discriminate against what the funding ask is, so that is completely eligible.
Great. Caroline, are you happy to unmute?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the application consultants, which you get to at that stage, because I have experience of that from a few years ago, and I know other people have had similar experiences. Sometimes not feeling that their project's being understood by this person or whatever. So I just wanted to ask, how do you like assign the consultants, or how do you train them, or how often do you sort of assess them? What's the sort of, just a bit more information on that stage of it?
Yeah, so there's a really thorough selection recruitment process for the consultants themselves. We get them to complete a mock panel report, which is something that we take to panel, so to sort of see that they understand what transformation is in the context of the Fore to begin with. We also we have a half-day training afternoon with them before we then decide whether or not to take them on. And in terms of sort of allocating specific consultants to specific organizations, basically that's done at random. However, we will try our best not to. So for example, if someone applied and they were unsuccessful, we'll try our best not to allocate the same consultant the next time around. And we also ourselves internally within the Fore team, especially at stage 1, we do a moderation of the feedback. So basically we will go through the however many pieces of feedback for the various organizations, and we'll just make sure that we're confident that the consultants understanding and rationale for not taking an application forward beyond stage 1 reflects our understanding of transformation. So that could mean, you know, going back to the consultant saying, you've said this, actually we don't think that's right, so therefore I feel like this applicant should be taken to stage 2. So there is that consistency check there. And then basically after the stage 2 calls, I then have a check-in with the consultants themselves, and we talk about which applicants we might want to take forward then to panel. So kind of the sort of role of the internal team within the Fore is obviously to make sure the process happens, but to make sure that as best we can when working with, you know, 12, 13 consultants, that there is consistency there and fairness in the decision-making process.
Great, thank you.
Great. We've got quite a few questions left, so there might be a possibility of running over by a couple of minutes, if that's all right. Got a question from Tessa. We can apply for between 1 and 3 years funding. Is it better to apply for 3 years rather than fewer, so the Fore can see the charity achieving its targets over a longer time frame, and possibly as a requirement for the release of further years funding?
Not really. I'd say it just depends on what your funding ask is. You know, if your funding ask is, you know, for a full-time post, then really you're going to be using up your funding in 1 year. Whereas if it's part-time, because that works operationally for you, then you'd see it over the 2 or 3 years. And that's why no matter what, for all organizations, whether the funding request is for the 1 year or the 3 years, you know, we ask the organizations to complete the 3 years of forecasting just so we can see where it is. And if you're worried about, you know, if it's a 1 year request and you're worried about not being able to demonstrate your impact because the targets that you have in the application will link to that 1 year, you can just include a bit of text underneath that says, and in the long term, we think that 2 years or 3 years post Fore grant, we're going to be at this place.
Yeah, okay. So I guess in terms of them expecting through a 1 year grant of bringing in a staff member, they'd be able to generate their own unrestricted fundraising through that staff member, so their wages will be covered in the future. Yeah, okay. A question from Jade: do you fund capital projects? If you'd like to go into more detail, they've moved into a building which is partially renovated, and most of their space is inaccessible and unusable. So their services have been pared back and they've lost beneficiaries. So yeah, it's kind of basically around whether or not you are able to fund capital projects.
Yeah, we do fund capital projects. That's absolutely eligible.
Great. A question from Cordelia. If an organisation has recently lost significant long-term funding, might Fore be able to support transformational change to get them back on track following a significant knockback?
Yeah, I think what I would say, yes, but what I would say there is it would be important in your application to demonstrate that it's basically not simply restoring business as usual. So it's kind of, yeah, it's filling that void, but then it's also adding additionality as well. I think that will be important.
Great. A question from Tessa. You talked about the transformation of moving from volunteer-led to staff-led. If some staffing is already in place, do you have a rule of thumb as to what you feel is appropriate level of staffing for the charity's level of turnover?
Not at all. I guess that's largely dependent on what the aspirations are for the organization, where they're at in their development, and also the level of support provided to beneficiaries as well. So we don't really consider that.
Mm-hmm. And then another question from Tessa: will every charity reaching stage 2 have an hour-long assessment, interview / meeting? Yeah, and you will get verbal feedback if you're not successful after that 1 hour call. Great. Follow up from Julie and Tim. When you say we will get feedback at various stages, so this is based on, I don't know, Julie and Tim, if either of you'd like to kind of unmute.
It was just, I think you just answered it, Francis, but in my case, I received an email, not verbal feedback. So I guess in that case, should I have gone back and asked for more verbal feedback? I just got a very brief email.
And Julie, had you spoken to a consultant then? Had you got through the stage?
Yeah, I had an interview.
Yeah, could I ask when that was?
It was some years ago now.
Yeah, okay. So basically we've changed the process, because before it used to be written feedback, and actually what we do now is offer a phone call, because we thought that was just better, because it then gives you the opportunity to ask questions as well.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's, because we're small charities, because all of our time is precious, then of course now we're weighing up, is it worth our time to even apply again?
Yeah.
And I guess all of us are in that same situation, that time is so precious that we don't want to waste your time.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, as I said at the start, a lot of organizations that were unsuccessful before have come back and been successful. So I just would say, just don't let that put you off, but I completely understand your time pressures as well.
Yeah.
Tessa, I noticed that you've got another query about the meeting time. I don't know if you'd like to unmute at all.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I do have a lot of questions, because I've recently been through this and I've come out kind of the other end very confused. So we got through to stage 2, which we were really delighted, but we literally had 15-20 minutes. And probably only, well, very few questions, and probably only, let's say, 10 minutes discussion before we were being wrapped up, which kind of took our feet from under us, because we'd done a full preparation based on the blog as to what would be covered, and none of it really was. So we were a bit stunned, and I've just had my feedback meeting, and that took longer than the assessment meeting, twice as long. Yeah. So it just felt it was a strange. It was a strange meeting, because we didn't feel we were completely, it wasn't explored what we were looking for.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, obviously without the contacts, and by all means get in touch after Tessa if you'd like to, but I know we say it can last up to an hour. It doesn't always, because I think sometimes it's used for the consultant to just ask questions where they feel like they have some that have emerged from looking at the application and trying to understand your organization. But yeah, if you want to follow up with us after, we can maybe talk about it.
Yeah, I'd actually really appreciate that. Yeah. Because most of my questions today have followed on from my feedback, and I'm getting the polar opposite responses from you than I had on my feedback. So again, because we'd love to reapply, just clarity that you wouldn't fail to fund us because we don't increase beneficiaries, and you wouldn't fund us because I've only asked for 2 years. So I'd really like to explore that, so I've got a much better chance this time around.
Thanks, Tessa.
Thank you.
Alex, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think those are all of the questions, unless anybody else has anything else that they'd like to ask at all.
Sorry, I don't know how to do it online to put my hand up. You talked in one of the slides about if you reapply to say how you've taken on board the feedback in your reapplication. But I looked at the website and it says something about if you reapply, it should be significantly different to the first application. So how do those two kind of gel together?
It either is the wording isn't clear on the website, or basically what that relates to if you've already received funding in the past. So obviously, if you've come through the process and you've been given like 2 very specific pieces of feedback, you don't need to change your funding request. You just need to take on board those bits of feedback. So sorry if there's any confusion there, Tessa.
Brilliant. That's probably me being too literal. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Great, I think that's everyone. Well, thank you very much, Francis. Thanks everyone for staying over. I know we've gone over by 4 minutes. Yeah, really insightful, and I hope everyone's had a chance to take away and potentially apply as well. And yeah, it was lovely to hear more about the application process. And if anyone does want to use this recording again, then we'll be adding it to our YouTube channel in a few days, and you'll get a link in the next mailer for that. And feedback forms will go out, so please do complete these. And if you have any requests for any other sessions, please let me know. But thank you very much, Francis, for joining us today.
Thanks for
and
having me.
everyone else.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers, everyone. Bye.